I would now like to introduce today's presenters. David Rickard, partner, leads Everest Group's global customer experience management services and sourcing and vendor management for EMEA clients. Abhi Dasgupta, practice director, manages Everest Group's trust and safety outsourcing offerings. Leveraging his significant consulting and research experience, he has advised many global service providers and enterprises on digital transformation, cost transformation, product strategy, and go-to-market strategy. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to David.
Thank you very much and welcome to today's webinar. Hopefully we can give you some interesting insights into what is a fascinating area of trust and safety. So we'll get on to the content really. And one of the things that we want to be covering is, well, three areas we're going to be covering today. So we're going to be looking at the current trust and safety trends. So we know as there's been emergence of more content that's being created and more formats that are being used, there is a real necessity from a moderator well-being perspective, but also to really think about how the regulatory environment is changing. So there's a lot of complexities being added to the trust and safety environment right now that we all need to be taking note of. I think as we start thinking about the human plus AI model of the future, that's also something that we've really got to pay close attention to. So we know that AI generated content is growing massively. There is positive and negative uses of that. So we're really looking at how that's going to have an impact on the future model. And then lastly, we're going to be looking at the connected trust and safety ecosystem. So thinking about as enterprises are struggling with handling an additional demand, as well as some of the budgetary controls and constraints that organizations are facing, how do you bring this all together to build the right level of ecosystem to really be able to address a business's needs and also the end customer's needs as well in something which is a really fast-paced moving environment. So hopefully we're going to give you some interesting insights today looking at around these three areas. So first of all, we're going to focus on the current state of the trust and safety market, and specifically around the outsourcing market, and have a look at the trust and safety process map, some of the key growth drivers that we're seeing, and then the complexities that we're seeing in the market. And Abhi, you know this market really well, so it'd be great to get your view in terms of, okay, where are we seeing in terms of the process map to start with? What do we mean when we're talking about trust and safety?
Yeah, thanks, David, for that. Yeah, so, trust and safety, I think this has been a question for some time now. And, as the market evolves, this is something that we also keep learning and growing with this. The fact that trust and safety as a service, right? There are a lot of adjacencies, there are a lot of overlaps with the other processes like, customer experience management, marketing services, even fraud management for that matter. So while keeping all those in mind, right, we also, wanted to, double down and figure out, okay, what are those, let's say, restrictions that we'll put in terms of what constitutes trust and safety and what doesn't. Right. And so essentially the process map that we came up with was after multiple rounds of discussions with all the trust and safety stakeholders that are there in the ecosystem, right? So enterprises, service providers, and everyone else. So essentially, if you look at trust and safety, and probably some of you would have seen an earlier iteration of this, before generative AI made our lives more interesting. So we have, review and compliance, which probably is which actually is the biggest bucket in trust and safety, and, probably goes by the more common name of content moderation, right? The reason why we haven't named that as content moderation over here is that, in the industry, a lot of people still use the term trust and safety and content moderation interchangeably. So to avoid that confusion, we've named it as review and compliance, which essentially is to do with the moderation of objectionable content, whether it is user-generated content or AI-generated content, right? Then things around, copyright and intellectual property compliance or privacy violations. And then some of the new use cases that have come up due to AI, like, AI-generated content identification or algorithm bias detection, data validation, right? One of the important things that are coming up, how can you help AI avoid hallucinations? So yeah, that's the biggest service within trust and safety. And then obviously there are other, adjacent services as well, like content curation, annotation, right? Data annotation is one of the most important services probably currently, given the fact that a large part of it is to do with training of the AI models, right? With public and private data. And apart from that, you also have, search quality ratings for search engines like a Chrome or a Bing. Uh, and so that's also a pretty big service within trust and safety. Apart from that, we also have things like user safety and authentication, or identity theft prevention becomes very important on platforms. I mean, if you look at some of the gaming companies, they're grappling with this issue of, children logging in as adults and then suffering abuse on those online platforms. So how do you prevent that, right? How do you maintain the integrity of platforms? You cannot really have, an e-commerce platform and then get flooded with fake reviews and fake comments and all that stuff, right? So that's also an important service. And then something which has been around for some time and is increasingly also becoming more and more important. We have seen what happened when Twitter announced the almost a dissolution of its then content moderation practice. Things around like ad placements or ad moderation, right? Like what happens if your enterprise policies are not in line with the platform moderation policies. So yeah, so that entire service around ad review and compliance, that's also part of trust and safety. And then obviously content services like translation, transcription, localization sometimes forms an inherent part of the entire moderation process. What we are also seeing increasingly is, apart from this, I would say, services that are provided within trust and safety on a regular basis, there is increasing appetite from enterprises to look for policy and regulatory support, more around, support on designing of policies, right? Or even support services for AI. So for example, stuff around AI strategy and consulting, or AI deployment, or even maintenance in certain cases, right? Especially non-big tech enterprises going for such services. So yeah, I mean, the idea over here is to just provide a snapshot of all the things that are there within trust and safety, right? Of course, within each of this, there are probably hundreds, if not thousands, of use cases which are there, and across industries, across geographies.
And Abby, right. So I guess it's safe to say we're not going to go into each of these in detail today, because
right,
we'd need about 4 weeks. So
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the idea over here is to provide an overall, outlook right into the realm of trust and safety. Yeah, if we start going into each of this in depth, yeah, we probably need 4 more sessions, or probably a session for each of these, separately, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So having said that context, right? So essentially, what we are seeing is the trust and safety market. If you look at the the market and the market growth, right? It has been a very, very fast growing market, right, over the last couple of years. But one of the things that has happened is the fact that due to some of the economic conditions, right, like regulatory, your recessionary trends, right, or the regulatory pressures in certain cases. Also the fact that enterprises have been trying to automate a lot of the stuff in-house, right? All those combined has essentially resulted in a reduction in the growth in regulatory spend, in the enterprise spend over the years, right? So if you look at it, it was probably a 30 percentage plus growing market somewhere around 2021, but it has come down steadily over the years. And what we believe is that, with the current economic climate and all the other factors, like I mentioned, the fact that enterprises want to automate more stuff in-house, we believe that, the spend will stabilize even more. Having said that, it's still a very fast growing market, right? It's probably is growing much faster than a lot of the other BPO services out there, right? Which essentially means that, like David mentioned, that enterprises are still grappling with moderation of a lot of content, right? It's not like that the trust and safety, use cases suddenly stop and life will become easier for everyone. So yeah, they still have to spend, they still have to figure out a way to moderate this content. And now, if you look at some of the regulations that are coming up in geographies like Europe, that essentially mean that the margin for error is even less compared to what it was before, right? So essentially that means that they will have to partner up with service providers for moderation of this content via humans, right? So yeah, so net, what that basically means is that yes, enterprise spend is slowing down due to recessionary trends and the increased usage of automation. Still, it's going to be a fast-growing market because of the inherent nature of trust and safety, where essentially you have a lot of content, and now because of AI, that volume of content is just exploding. So that again means that you need moderation of that content. that in turn means that enterprises will need to, use the expertise of service providers to moderate that content, right?
Brilliant. Yeah, and so I think it's an interesting place to be, and I think that as we say here, I mean the digital ecosystem has opened up a Pandora's box of new complexities, whilst also intensifying the existing ones. So the old challenges haven't gone away, but we've actually been faced with a whole lot of new ones. So just going a little bit deeper on some of those areas that we touched on earlier. So you've got the existing complexity. So toxic content is not going away, unfortunately. It is actually speeding up as you start to think about the need for localization and contextual understanding, and then also policy enforcement. So as more and more policies and alignment on international regulations are required, that actually those are existing complexities that are speeding up. But then actually, as you start to think about the emerging complexities that we're seeing, so artificial intelligence and all the regulations that are being built around that, new content types that could be user generated, it can be generative AI generated, the fact that users are getting access to more advanced technologies, which again can increase the quality and also the speed that content is being put out there in the market. And then the rise of the non-distinguishable AI and other auto-generated data, so spotting deep fakes, etc. There is a massive amount of complexities that are hitting the market in this space. And it's also interesting that I've been in the industry 20 odd years, and really it was all about, when we talked about content moderation in the old days, it was about social media. But I think as we're seeing now a rise in terms of gaming, e-commerce, dating, but even BFSI and fintech needing levels of trust and safety across all of the different work types, as there's more user-generated content, more interaction with customers, etc., things like data annotation. So a real growth in not only in the complexities and the existing volumes, but also in new markets and new areas. And so I think we're seeing this market having a lot of complexity that people are having to wrestle with. So if you're a buyer on this call, then you're probably thinking, well, I sit into that area. What do I need to be looking at? And if you're a service provider, your market's opening up all the time as more and more people are needing these type of content moderation and trust and safety, more broadly, services that are hitting the market.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you think about it from a geo perspective and regulatory, Abby, I mean, I think we're seeing quite a diverse sort of footprint there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say it's almost a kind of a double whammy, right, for the enterprises, because not only are you now dealing with, more complex kinds of content, new use cases that are coming up, but you're also dealing with, an increasing, I would say, dynamism when it comes to regulations all around the world, right? If it had been so that, the regulations were strict, but they were strict all across all the geographies, that would have still probably made life easier. But the biggest challenge is that there is a lot of difference in terms of how, different geographies have set up regulations for content moderation. Especially with the Digital Safety Act coming up in Europe, and I think by early next year, it would apply to all the digital enterprises, irrespective of their size. And the nuances might be different, but they'll apply all the same. What that essentially means is, like I mentioned before, the margin for error becomes even less, right, compared to before. So yeah, it was never like that, you could be lax about content moderation, but now it probably means that you have to check it twice before you can say that, okay, content has been moderated properly. So that essentially means that, what that means is, probably in certain cases you would have to have human intervention, where only technology may have sufficed before, but probably you now need a pair of eyes to check whether, the accuracy is fine or not, whether the contextualization is fine or not. Now that's just Europe, right? But if you look at even markets like APAC, right, there also, regulations are increasingly coming up, both which relate to content moderation, as well as regulations on generative AI, and the regulations are only going to get stricter. I think one of the things that OECD they announced, I think last month, if I'm not wrong, is that they're going to come up with certain guidelines and on content moderation and usage of generative AI in trust and safety in the APAC region. So yeah, what that basically means is that, regulators are setting up and taking notice faster than they have generally done, right? And that's why, you'll see probably slew of regulations coming up, which will essentially put the onus on the enterprises to make sure that the platforms are safe. Obviously, the enterprise is already doing that, but now there is also there will be a legal requirement to do so, right? So yeah, so essentially what that means, like I was saying, that you have to deal with more complex content, but you also have to deal with more, stricter regulations to make sure that you're moderating that content very well, so as to ensure the safety of the digital platforms, right? Okay. The other thing is that, as you think about the complex content, right? Obviously, a lot of this content that is produced and needs to be moderated is obnoxious content, right? So obviously, with the increase in the content volume, it is but natural that the volume of obnoxious content that is getting produced is also increasing, right? So as that increases, the moderator well-being still remains a top priority for enterprises, right? I mean, if you look at it, I mean, despite multiple tools, technologies, and platforms, accurate moderation still requires human touch, right? So whether it's for contextualization, whether it's for prevention of the inherent bias that is there in AI, or transparency, or policy building, linguistic support, whatever it may be, right? You still require a lot of human intervention for moderation. So what that basically means is that moderators will continue getting exposed to a lot of harmful content day in, day out, right? And as the volume and complexity of such harmful content increases, the toll that it takes on the mental well-being will also increase, right? So if you look at AI itself, the fact that it is producing more volume obviously means that there has to be much bigger investments in moderator well-being to make sure that moderators are able to deal or cope with the kind of obnoxious content that they will face day in, day out, right? So yeah, I mean, if it can be vicarious trauma, emotional distress, whatever it may be, but yeah, the end of the day, what we see a lot of enterprises and service providers, uh, you know, I would say almost emphasizing on is the fact that moderator well-being has to be a fundamental, I would say, operating principle as far as trust and safety is concerned, and not an afterthought, right? Right. So which is why, for a lot of these enterprise and service providers, moderator well-being is no longer, just I would say just an employee program, but almost like an operating principle that they follow throughout the organization, right? And as we go ahead and AI becomes more robust and starts producing more complex content, this is only going to get more and more important, right?
Yeah, because I think it's interesting, Abby, because for years, I think the intent of enterprises was always, and service providers, leverage as much technology as you can to reduce the need for people. But actually what that does is what's left for the people to deal with can be some of the most egregious stuff to do. So actually moderator well-being is so vital in this context, because yes, they might have less volume, but that volume is probably the worst stuff that's left. So it's not going away. The need to obviously be focused on moderator well-being is actually increasing all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just a point to make over here. I think we have been probably portraying AI as this big super villain who is making lives of people more difficult. It's not like that. I mean, while yes, AI has the ability to produce more content, but it also is a technology at the end of the day. And as with every technology, right, there's a good and bad to it. So while it can be used to create more obnoxious content, but it can also be used to create technology interventions, even for the well-being of moderators, right? I mean, we already have wearable devices. We already have ML and deep learning for content triaging. We already have computer vision for as a first level of screening against obnoxious content, and these are only going to get more important as we go forward, right? These are technology based interventions, and a lot of times such technology based interventions actually help in reducing the exposure that moderators have to obnoxious content. So as a first line of defense, it goes a long way in reducing the mental stress of moderators.
Yeah, but it's a good point, Abby. But I think also we shouldn't make any apologies for calling out some of the downsides, because I think if we just focused on the upsides, we're missing a really important part, which is you do also have to, as a business or as a service provider delivering services, you have to be prepared for the not nice stuff as well as the positive stuff, which we can get through AI. But you're right to call out the balance. AI is, and all technologies can have a really big part to play in this, but we also have to balance the positives and the negatives.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So as we think about the emerging trends we're seeing in the industry and the things that are shaping the trust and safety outsourcing market, then again, we're going back to the same topic, talking about generative AI, but then also the continued need for human intervention. And I think we're at Everest Group, we strongly believe there is a strong need for a lot of humans in the loop in a lot of these processes that we talk about. So technology disruption is leading to new use cases that require a combination of human and AI-based solutions. So again, we're basically just saying the same thing we've just said just a minute ago, which is there actually are going to be new use cases, but actually humans and AI are going to have to work together. And Abby, maybe take us through some of them. Let's not go through every single one, but maybe look at some of them where we feel are going to be sort of the most impactful.
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is just a word cloud, right? So it's like if you ask people the term AI, what is it that comes to their mind, right? And it was a whole host of things that people came up. Generative AI, obviously, large language models, artificial intelligence, yes. I mean, platform safety, deep learning, live moderation. Live moderation is actually a very interesting example because, even with the current AI models, I mean, live moderation is probably one of the most challenging tasks that you have to do today, and it's because of the speed that is involved along with the accuracy. I mean, it's all real time, right? And then things like natural language processing and all language translation, transcription, they have been here for some time, and they will continue to be important, right? So generative AI, when we think of it, for a lot of people, right, it might look like almost like the shiniest new toy probably, but yeah, it's not like it's a completely new technology. In fact, it's based on deep learning techniques which a lot of the current AI models are already using, right? So yeah, but it's just a more evolved form of deep learning, I mean, so to speak. So which basically, if you look at the the current trust and safety technology landscape, right, I mean, the first things first, a lot of content even today is moderated using automation engines, right? It's not like it's completely human and that the automation portion is very small and then generative AI is going to suddenly come and increase that manifold. So yeah, so you have these technologies like natural language processing, machine learning, OCR, computer vision, digital hashing, deep learning already in play, right? As part of the AI models which take part in trust and safety services, and they will continue to be important in the future, right? So, and what is essentially going to happen or likely going to happen is for a lot of these enterprises, they are going to utilize the good parts of these, right? Along with generative AI to come up with more robust, AI models, right? Now, some of these AI models may be used purely for data generation, while some of these models may be used for, as a trust and safety automation engine, right? Either way, it either way, what this basically means is that generative AI is just the, let's say, an advancement in technology or the news or the next step as far as advancement of the AI models is concerned, right? But yeah, that doesn't really mean that suddenly the automation is going to explode all over the place, and it's not happening right now. It's still happening at a pretty large scale, right? Because given the scale of content that is produced, it's not humanly possible to go and moderate all of that content via human moderators. Generative AI is probably just going to, facilitate that automation even further.
So,
right. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, no, thanks. So we just wanted to do a quick poll of the audience really and get a sense from you. So it's sort of a one or two question really, which is, so where do you see generative AI having the greatest impact on trust and safety? Do you see it as a real disruptor? So rising volume, obnoxious content, or do you see it as an automation enabler? So actually helping to moderation of simpler content types, moderation of complex content types as well as we go. So we'll leave this poll open for about 30 seconds more. Thank you for those who are responding. So we've got a few people responding. If you can just sort of, it'd be great to get your opinion. At the moment, we're about 50-50. So it'd be great to get a couple more people responding. I don't want to sound like a horse racing commentator, but it'd be great to get a few more people responding, just so we can see if there's any differentiation in the market. So we'll leave it open for 15 seconds more, if that's okay, and then we'll look to close the poll and see what we say. It's still pretty close, but there is one winner coming out. So give 5 seconds more, and then we'll look to close the poll. Thank you very much. So what we can see actually is, so 45% people are saying that generative AI is going to be a disruptor. So increasing volume, increasing obnoxious content, etc. And 55% of you see it as an automation enabler. So that's really interesting, actually. So pretty level. I think it would be, in my opinion, that's probably because actually it would be both. I think we are going to see it in terms of generating more content to deal with, and also we're going to be able to use it to deal with that content. So interesting, and it would be great if we, at some point, if we follow up with follow-on conversations, get your sense, and whether you're a service provider or a buyer on this webinar, whether your view is different depending on whether you're providing services or buying services. But thank you for doing that. That's really interesting. So we've got one more poll later on as well. So thank you.
Yeah.
So just on the back of that, we are doing some work right now to think about that from our perspective in terms of where do we think the market's going to go. And so what we've done is we've taken a look at the BPS market, or trust and safety BPS market as it stands today. What Abby was talking about there, that $9.4 to $10.4 billion a year. And what we're assessing is actually we will see an increase use of cases due to AI generated content. And actually we'll also see an increase in value add services. So the services that are going to be around the delivery of these trust and safety content. But actually we're going to see a reduction in volume in terms of the increased in-house automation through the leveraging of generative AI. But what we are predicting that by 2025-26, we actually do expect that the trust and safety BPS market will see an increase in size due to the opportunity of generative AI. So it's not just that there's going to be more content generated and there's going to be more services that's going to need the support around it, but actually that's going to be negated a little bit by the increased automation that we can see. But still a positive, if you're looking to attack this market from a service provider perspective, there's growth in the market. If you're a buyer on this webinar, you may be thinking about actually it is going to actually have to increase your spend over time versus reduce your spend, where it may be the assumption right now by being able to leverage generative AI. But Abby, I don't know if you've got anything to add on this slide, but I think that's the takeaway, which is the market is going to continue to grow even with the advent of generative AI.
Yeah, no, absolutely, David. And I think, probably the two biggest factors which are kind of contributing to this net positive opportunity is the fact that, the content volume, right, is probably going to explode, right, with AI. I mean, even if you take AI out of the equation, even on the user generated side, right, I mean, the content keeps growing at a massive volume, right? And there are so many enterprises who are coming up, right? And, they are growing fast, digital enterprises, and then they realize that they need trust and safety services, right? Because, now you suddenly have a situation where the volume of content is so massive that you really cannot, basically moderate it in-house, right, with a limited number of resources. So that's one. The second is, like I mentioned before, right, that, there is, like it shows over here, there's going to be an increase in the in-house automation, right? But it's not like that, suddenly this in-house automation is going to explode like anything. I mean, even today, with a lot of the larger enterprises, a lot of the content, I mean, the majority of the content is moderated in-house through automation engines, right? And so the real change would be the fact that right now, probably most of the content that is moderated through automation engines are low and medium complexity content, right? But increasingly, as generative AI gets more robust, right, and you have more robust trust and safety automation engines, it will lead to moderation of some portion of the high complexity content as well, right? And that essentially means that, what will be left for the humans to moderate would probably be content which requires very, very specialized moderation skills, right? So things like, as of now, need humans for services like hallucination, prevention of hallucination, or for identification of deep fakes, right? Or for the algorithm bias detection. So yeah, I mean, some of this stuff, to varying degrees might get automated in-house, but yeah, I mean, on the whole, what it means is that the content volume is going to grow so much that, yeah, it is probably going to trump the automation that is going to be done in-house, which is why the net positive opportunity, right?
Brilliant. Thanks. And I think that you covered probably a lot of that in this slide as well. But what we see is that the use cases are going to increase. And so if you look at it in terms of where Gen AI has already started to generate use cases, we're looking at things such as, say, copyright infringement issues or harmful threats. We touched on hallucinations quite a bit already. And then if you think about actually, so what are some of the challenges? So generative AI and AI in general is not going to solve all of our problems, but actually there are also some challenges that you've got to overcome. So it is time consuming and resource intensive to go through the training. That's something that has to be factored in. I think you also have to factor in the contextual understanding, the risk of data leakage and security issues. And I did a webinar a few months ago talking to a lot of enterprises about generative AI, and that was the biggest concern, was around security. This wasn't in a trust and safety context, but just more broadly. But actually, security is obviously one of those biggest concerns. You've also then got transparency in the information collected and storage. And then also upfront cost is one of the other biggest issues we're hearing right now, and the transparency of the cost. So what you've got the hardware and the software licenses and then the specialist expertise. But just in terms of even thinking about the cost models for generative AI, predicted to come down over time, but still quite high right now. And people are struggling to understand how you price some of these use cases. And so it really has to be a strong focus around governance, but also understanding the ROI of some of these investments that people are going to have to make. And then you can see some of the potential use cases along the bottom there. We're talking about revision of harmful content, or really thinking about well-being advisory and support. So you could leverage the technology to be stepping in and supporting advisors when they're working on some of these things. So really interesting to see how, as the content is being generated and there may be more content that has to be moderated, the technology can be used for bad and for good, as we said. But actually you also have to think about, as you start thinking about your strategy, whether you're a service provider providing these or an enterprise buying these, which is how do you overcome some of the challenges as well from a adoption of Gen AI perspective, because it's not an easy thing to implement, and it has to be thought through to get the benefits that you would be looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, David, one more point that I would probably want to call out over here is that, as with a lot of technology adoption, right, it can never really be a kind of a big bang event, right? You do everything at once. It has to be gradual, right? And, you identify certain use cases, you make your investments, you see what's the ROI, then probably that kind of drives your decision to invest further in the technology or not, or to invest in some other form. And, a clear distinction probably can be made between, say, something like Metaverse last year, which kind of burned bright for a small period of time and then faded away. But with generative AI, we generally see enterprises being much more cautious, and not only due to the fact that it is pretty costly right now, but also the fact, like you mentioned, that the security concerns, the compliance with regulations, right? Probably these are the two largest factors which is providing that kind of cautious optimism that before you invest, let's look at all the kind of impact that it can have in terms of my current policies and what it means for my compliance with local laws, right?
Yeah, brilliant.
Okay, yeah. So here's another poll. Yeah, be very, very interesting to see like what people on this call think of it today.
Yeah, so we're really looking just to get a sense in terms of how do you expect the impact of your moderator count over the next 2 to 3 years. So it ranges from significant reduction to uncertain about it, or you expect your moderator count to increase. So really just trying to get a sense. We've done similar similar questions in other areas. So customer experience management is an area I spend a lot of my time on. And actually we thought it would be expected it to have a greater impact quicker, but actually people are expecting it to have an impact, but over the medium to longer term. So it's good to also compare and contrast how we see it across different processes within an enterprise that they need to leverage. So quite a lot of words there in terms of the content, the questions. So we'll leave it open for a little bit more, and then Abby, I'll leave it to you to interpret the responses. But if we maybe give it 10 seconds more.
Yeah.
There's a couple that are pretty close, actually. So similar to what we've seen in other areas, which is great. So maybe 5 seconds, and then we'll close the poll.
Yeah.
That's great. So what do you think, Abby?
Yeah. So I think, I see most of the people have believed that there's either going to be a moderate impact on that moderate account, right? And it's probably going to there's going to be augmentation of existing moderation, right, due to generative AI. But some other folks believe that there's going to be obviously a decrease in the moderate account, but that decrease is going to be gradual, as the enterprises ramp up their adoption of generative AI. And I think that's in line with typically what we are seeing in terms of the impact and the different conversations that we are having with enterprises and service providers. That generative AI for most cases, right, it's not going to be almost like the end all of human moderation and trust and safety, right? There are a lot of things that still require human support, we have spoken about before, and they'll continue to require human support, right? You cannot really just take that human intervention out of the equation suddenly one fine day, right? But having said that, obviously there is still a scope for moderation automation engines to be able to automate some of the stuff, especially around the more transactional work, right? And that we believe will likely get automated, while the more complex moderation, will still probably be within the realm of human moderation, due to contextualization requirements, localization requirements, and then obviously now even regulatory requirements in certain geographies like Europe, right? So yeah, I think, but it's very interesting to see. I think there's some people also believe that there's going to be a significant reduction in moderate account due to automation, right? And yeah, at this point in time, obviously, I mean, any of this can be true, honestly, right? I mean, it can go either way. We can only have conjectures at this point in time what it can be, right? But again, it all depends on the pace of improvement of technology, right? If technology reaches a certain maturity where it can take over most of the work from human moderators, then yeah, it can also lead to significant reduction. But at this point in time, based on the trends that we're seeing in the market and the kind of abilities that are coming into generative AI on a daily, not a daily, but probably a monthly basis, yeah, we still believe that it's probably going to be a gradual decrease of moderators over a period of time as the generative AI adoption ramps up, right? So yeah, so as I was speaking before that, there is still a lot of human support required, right? And in fact, a lot of that human support will be required simply because enterprises will adopt generative AI, things like policy advisory. So advice on what the policies should look like for generative AI, advice on how exactly to make sure that the AI generated content is in line with the enterprise AI policies, in addition to being compliant with local regulations. Then things are like analytics in terms of, okay, like how much of the content is produced by generative AI is obnoxious, or how much has there been an increase in obnoxious content due to generative AI, things like that. I mean, those are the kind of support that enterprises will need from service providers, right? Irrespective of whether they are using automation in-house or not. And then there are certain kinds of obnoxious content like CSAM, of which obviously at the end of the day require human intervention due to the complex nature of such content, right? And then there is the the support required even for the training of AI engines, right? I mean, a lot of enterprises require a lot of training data to train their AI, and the reason, I mean, the simple underlying truth is that the more data you provide, the better the AI gets at producing output. So yeah, at least for an extended period of time, the need for training data would be massive, right? So if you're a buyer joining us on this call today, you probably agree with us that the need for training data is probably one of the number one priorities right now, along with compliance and data and security. And if you're a service provider joining this call, you understand that, yeah, there are multiple ways in which you can help an enterprise by providing training data for training the AI engines, right? Right, David, you have anything to add over here? May not be from a trust and safety perspective, but from overall, if you're seeing anything else in terms of the support that enterprises are looking for.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think you've covered it really well. So I just also would encourage people to, if you've got questions, please use the Q&A. As I said, we may get time at the end to do that. If not, we'll always follow up. But just thinking about sort of moving on to the next section now. So really wanted to just cover some of the key sourcing considerations for enterprises. So when we do these webinars, I always like to try and cover both audiences, because we know we get a lot of service providers. We know we also get a lot of people who are buying these services. So we want to give a sense in, and if you're a service provider, this may be an interesting insight into what your buyers are looking for. If you're a buyer, then it might give you some insights into what your peers are looking for. So we just want to give you a sense in terms of what we're seeing in the market. So what we're seeing is actually enterprises are starting to re-strategize their trust and safety spend. So thinking about, we know that cost is a number one driver for many organizations right now. So actually what we're seeing is that organizations are having to think about, okay, where am I spending my really valuable dollars? Where can I go after savings? So actually, when we start thinking about it though, just to set the scene, when we think about it in terms of adoption trends, where we see that the trust and safety spend is split, as we said earlier, the traditional spend has always been around the social media, and that's at 63 to 68% of the market. But we are definitely seeing sort of growth in terms of the e-commerce space that we touched on earlier. BFSI is seeing strong growth. Gaming, especially as sort of gaming is much more of an interactive experience. It's not like when I was young where we sat behind an Atari and played a game on our own, but now there's a much more of a, I'm showing my age there with an Atari. But yeah, there's much more of an interactive approach. And so there's a high level of trust and safety that's required there. And when we start thinking about it from an industry perspective, then when you start thinking about, well, why is there growth in e-commerce? It's because actually the trust and safety services are being used to do things such as identify fraud patterns or third-party website redirection and the assessment of that. If you're thinking about gaming moderation, it's the trade monitoring, which is, again, something that is relatively new, or age-restricted ads, that because most games have some sort of ads in them now. So there's a lot of different use cases. When you think about even travel and hospitality, where you think, well, it wouldn't actually necessarily be so much from a trust and safety perspective, but you start thinking about driver onboarding or listing moderation, comment moderation, these things which, again, 5-10 years ago, we probably didn't even think really would fall within this remit, are starting to do there. And then you think about other segments, and actually this is where it proliferates across all verticals, really. You start thinking about job listings and podcast moderation, cloud moderation. So we're definitely seeing that actually trust and safety is spanning a lot more industries than where we originally thought it was. And Abby, just very briefly, anything that, I mean, you've been working in this space for a long time now, anything you would add to this slide?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, some of these use cases in industries like travel and hospitality, or in some of the other gaming, right? Very, very interesting use cases. So I remember this incident that had happened a few months back, where there was a person who had listed out her property on Airbnb, right? And essentially it was a nice property in some place in India, if I'm not wrong. And then what essentially happened was that she had probably a tussle with some of her neighbors, right? So the neighbors were able to some way get a lot of fake reviews about the property that she had listed, right? And it essentially, what happened was the rating went down so badly that Airbnb's algorithm essentially kind of delisted that property, right? But that is a kind of use case that has come up where you can have a lot of these fake reviews and fake comments and all of that, really harming your reputation on such platforms, right?
Yeah. I mean, your brand and your reputation is key on those type of platforms, isn't it? So actually having, I mean, we often see the stories around reviews of restaurants, which I saw one the other day, and then someone had complained about a particular dish which they don't even sell. So it is one of those things which is can be really impactful for businesses that are relying on social media to generate their business. So just moving on, wanted to also think about, as we know, enterprises, and we do a key issue study every year, and for this year, the biggest key issue across all of the enterprises we spoke to was around cost reduction and cost optimization. What we're seeing is actually there is that focus around delivery locations, and we've seen a drop in the onshore delivery of services, a slight increase of nearshore and an increase in offshore. So we typically see that when people are chasing those cost savings, or the type of interaction is deemed to be maybe of simpler or less contextual to be able to be delivered offshore. But actually, we're seeing that increase as people are thinking about it. And what we're seeing is also delivery models emerging where you're using a hub and a spoke model. So using a tier 1 city in India, for example, could be used as the primary hub, but then you can use some spokes in tier 2 and tier 3 cities to give you additional resources you need, but at a lower cost. And actually, we know there's from outsourcing for many years, a number of benefits in terms of tier 2, tier 3 cities in any of the really large outsourcing destinations, really. So it tends to be lower cost than tier 1, obviously. Actually, you still can get the skilled workforce, but it is at lower cost. And actually, if you go to some of those locations first, then you get the early mover advantage. And so you can create differentiation by being somewhere before anyone else. So we're definitely seeing that there is a focus on how you diversify your model. And also, as that last point says, if you are looking at tier 2 and 3 locations, you also can offer some risk diversification, because as always, in anything that you outsource, you have to balance that cost, quality and risk triangle. And so actually being able to balance the cost with the risk is going to be important, and providing you can deliver the quality. So really interesting in terms of the focus from a cost perspective.
Yeah, and I would just add that, the shift towards tier 2 and tier 3 cities, I mean, this is not confined to major offshore locations like India or Philippines. This is happening in the onshore locations as well. We have seen a lot of tier 2 and tier 3 cities in North America come up for delivery to some of the largest enterprises who spend in trust and safety.
Brilliant. Thanks, Abby. And then lastly, I think in terms of, as we think about enterprises and their priorities, what we're seeing is that actually there is a focus on supply consolidation. So again, one of my roles is that we talk to a lot of sourcing, vendor managers, procurement leads, and they're talking about actually looking to consolidate the amount of service providers that they have and build more strategic partnerships with their suppliers. And so that opens up the discussions around things such as ESG, making sure you're aligned on your vision, because you look at the bottom of this pyramid, you've got the table stake stuff. So that's where you're leveraging maybe a service provider more just as a transactional relationship. You then start moving up that pyramid and you start thinking about, okay, you start to build more of a value add relationship as it matures. And then you start thinking about things such as geographical coverage and performance. But then you start to build that partner ecosystem, starting to leverage the providers for technology. And then you get to the point where you're really building that strategic partnership. So we are definitely seeing that buyers are looking to have fewer providers and having more strategic relationships with those providers that they work with. That obviously makes it difficult for some service providers to break into new areas, but existing service providers are seeing the opportunities to expand across different practice areas. So maybe if you're in CX, they move into trust and safety, or vice versa, and other areas within the BPO landscape as well. So definitely a focus on building those relationships with service providers is becoming key as people are looking to consolidate.
Right. Yeah. Just one point before we get to this, while David spoke about consolidation of service providers, but it's not like it's limitless, right? What enterprises are essentially looking at is, while they consolidate their service provider portfolio, but they're also trying to find the optimum mix, right? What I mean by that is, they would only do consolidation up to a point where beyond which, then if there is risk of the concentration risk becomes too high, they would not go for a service provider consolidation beyond that point, right? So with a lot of the mergers that have happened in the industry, we have heard enterprises raise concerns around whether that is going to cause concentration risk or not beyond the economies of scale. And, as a result of that, what has happened is several of the large enterprises have actually kind of restructured their contracts. They have gone out and, set up operations with new service providers, right? And which is why we believe that, while consolidation is happening and enterprises would welcome the economies of scale benefits that they would get from such consolidation of service providers, but because there is also a concentration risk involved in having a very small provider portfolio, so there is a lot of opportunities still for some of the relatively newer entrants in this space to still gain a foothold with some of these enterprises for their trust and safety services, right? And that actually brings us to the trust and safety peak that we had this in 2023. I would say the biggest takeaway from this peak is the fact that, when we embarked on this exercise, right, we realized that there have been multiple new entrants in the last year itself compared to the year before, right? And the number of new entrants just keeps increasing in this space because obviously, like I mentioned before, it's now, it's maturing, but it's still a pretty fast growing market, right? And with the content volume growing at such a massive pace and the moderation requirements of the enterprises, there is enough opportunity to attack, right? Especially if you're a new player in this space. So I think we, in the last peak that we had done, we probably featured around 18 players. This has increased to 25 this year, and probably increase even further next year. Yes, you have some of the largest service providers who have been providing trust and safety services for some time now, but you also have some of the new entrants in this space. And another important takeaway over here, if you see, is that it's a mix of players who are, let's say, customer experience specialists as well as IT BPOs, right? And there are a lot of other players as well, and everyone probably has a separate or different go-to-market strategy and the way that they want to approach trust and safety. And obviously, a part of that is due to the fact that some of the enterprises rely more on human moderators, while other enterprises look for human plus AI kind of a solution. But no matter what your play is, there is a lot of buyers, a lot of enterprises in this market. And from the enterprise point of view, this is but just a snapshot of all the service providers that are there. The number of players are probably much higher than this, but it provides a good probably a good snapshot in terms of some of the providers who have been providing trust and safety services for some time now.
Yeah, and just one thing I would add on this. I mean, a question I often get from buyers is, so does that mean that we look straight at the leaders? And my answer always is no. It depends on what you'll need and what you buy. So I always like to qualify when we talk about the peak, which is, so we do look at the leaders based on their vision and capability and market impact. And then we have our major contenders and we have our aspirants. But regardless of where any of these providers are, they have great offerings. They may be for a particular market, a particular geo, particular type of process. But actually, my advice to buyers always is, this is a great place to start. If you're looking at a provider, start with the peak. That becomes your long list. And then you can whittle that down to a smaller set of providers based on how do they match to your requirements if you're in a particular geo or a particular vertical and you're looking for a specialist. So sounds obvious, but I always do like to sort of make sure that's clear, which is all of these providers have great capabilities. Some are more specific to particular verticals or geos or markets that you may want to consider. Others are maybe broader or more global.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for that, David. Yeah, and then I think it's important to touch upon this, that while we have been talking about technology and the impact of generative AI, one of the questions still remains is how exactly is the technology supposed to evolve, and who will have the ownership, and who is supposed to drive the entire technology adoption, right? So what we have seen developing, and what we believe will become even more important in the future, is the fact that the entire evolution of trust and safety technology as of today, whether it is based on generative AI, whether it is based on some other technology, right, will have to be driven by a connected ecosystem, and it cannot be just driven by one a stakeholder within the entire ecosystem, right? So technology providers, service providers, enterprises, they have to come together, because all of them are for all of them, trust and safety is an important service, due to one factor or the another, right? So everyone has a stake in this, and so everyone has to come together to make the investments, right? Now, obviously, there can be discussions around who owns the underlying technology stack, or how do you price it, or what should be the investment roadmap. But whether it's an enterprise, whether it's a service provider, whether it's a technology provider, right? All of them have one or the other, I would say, expertise to provide, right? So for example, you could build a tech stack, you could build a technology, but then you would need someone to scale it up, right? While building that technology, you might need the funding, or you might need the expertise to build that technology. And if everyone comes together, it becomes much easier and faster to build such kind of technology. Because see, at the end of the day, especially due to well-being concerns, but also due to other factors, you would probably want to have almost like a end-to-end platform, right, which can take care of a lot of the moderation needs, right, across different content types, across different geographies, industries, whatnot. But to build that, everybody has to bring their expertise in and work together to make it a reality.
Yeah, and I think that's a key point, really, which is it is about building a connected ecosystem to be able to bring all of these parts to bear. You've got the human, you've got the technology, they have to work together. So I think that's a great way to end it. So we've run out of time, and what I'd like to leave us with is actually just to give you an opportunity that if you wanted to connect with us within the chat, there is a link. And we can actually have a conversation. We're offering a complimentary analyst inquiry from myself and Abby and the team, where we would actually help to calibrate your trust and safety journey and give you some views in terms of where we see the market going from generative AI, go-to-market strategies, some of the regulatory landscape, all the things that you can see there. So if you are interested in having that discussion, then please, I say you've either got our email addresses, which will be in the slides that I show at the end, or that you'll get when you get the pack, or through that link in the webinar chat, then you actually have access to us as well. So thank you for your time today. Give everyone 2 minutes back to get to your next meeting. So hopefully that's useful as well. But as I said, please reach out if there are any other questions, or if you're interested in having a further conversation. And thank you, Abby, for taking us through a lot of that content as well.
Yeah, no, thanks, David. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.